On April 29, 2014, in the somber shadows of the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Clayton Lockett, 38, faced his final judgment. After 14 years on death row, he walked into the cold room where a lethal dose promised to end his dark string of crimes. But fate played a cruel trick. 43 horrifying minutes turned the execution into an eternal nightmare. In this video, we will uncover the truth behind the tragedy, his last meal, and his haunting final words. Late in the afternoon of April 29, 2014, the air inside the Oklahoma State Penitentiary was heavy, as if foreshadowing a storm. Guards moved urgently, their eyes tense. In the operations room, phones rang incessantly. An urgent call from inside the prison had just been transferred to the office of Director Robert Patton. That call marked the beginning of one of the most controversial executions in American history. Clayton Lockett, a death row inmate convicted of murder, rape, and kidnapping, did not die as planned. Instead, he endured 43 minutes of agony before his heart finally stopped. What happened? And why would a state allow a human being to die in such torment? To understand why Clayton Lockett ended up on the execution gurney, we must go back to his past, a childhood full of pain and violence. Born in 1975, Lockett grew up in the shadow of abandonment and abuse. His mother left him when he was 3, leaving the boy with a cruel father. His father beat Lockett mercilessly, forced him to use drugs from a young age, and taught him how to steal without getting caught. In 1992, at the age of 16, Lockett entered the spiral of crime. He pleaded guilty to burglary and knowingly concealing stolen property in Kay County, receiving a 7-year prison sentence. That same year, he was charged with intimidating state witnesses. But prison didn't reform him, it broke him. At the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, an adult facility, Lockett was gang raped by 3 adult prisoners. That psychological scar turned him into a ticking time bomb. In 1996, Lockett received another 4-year sentence for conspiracy to commit a felony in Grady County, but the fateful crime occurred in June 1999 when he was 24. Lockett, along with 2 accomplices, Alfonso VZ Lockett and Sean Mathis, attacked a group of young people, including Stephanie Neiman, a 19-year-old high school graduate. Neiman was an unwitting witness to the robbery and kidnapping. He used duct tape to bind Neiman's hands and cover her mouth, taking her to a remote area in Perry, Oklahoma. There he raped her. When Neiman vowed to go to the police if released, Lockett coldly decided to kill her. He shot her from about 2 meters with a 12-gauge shotgun slug, knocking her to the ground with a torn chest and shoulder. The gun jammed. Lockett calmly used a screwdriver to unjam his shotgun, returned, and shot her again. Still not dead, Neiman was then ordered by Lockett for his accomplices to bury her alive. She died from her wounds, lying beneath the cold earth. On June 4, 1999, Detective David Farrow arrested Lockett and his accomplices at a convenience store in Enid, Oklahoma. The shotgun used in the murder was found hidden in a box spring mattress in a garage where Lockett had been staying. 86 pieces of evidence, from Neiman's DNA to fingerprints on the duct tape, were presented at trial. In 2000, Lockett was sentenced to death for murder, rape, kidnapping, assault, and other charges. Alfonso and Mathis received life sentences, but the question remains haunting. Did a ruined childhood lead Lockett down this path? Or was he a cold-blooded killer beyond redemption? On April 29, 2014, in a special cell just steps from the execution chamber, Clayton Lockett, 38, faced his last meal. There was no special menu for death row inmates in Oklahoma, a cold prison policy. He could only choose from the daily menu like any other inmate. But in that moment, the meal was more than just food. It was a brief pause before the 43-minute nightmare to come. On the gray plastic tray placed before Lockett was a simple meal: a dry piece of roasted beef, a few cold French fries, a bland plate of boiled green beans, and a cloudy glass of orange juice. There was no dessert, no luxury. The smell of charred meat mingled with the musty air of the cell, a grim reminder that this was no meal of freedom. Lockett sat on the steel bed, his eyes empty, the plastic spoon trembling slightly in his hand. He refused the food tray twice that day, as if wanting to deny the impending death. But finally he ate, slowly, piece by piece, without a word. That meal offered no comfort. It was a symbol of a cold system where even a human being's final moments were stripped of solemnity. Lockett, who had taken Stephanie Neiman's life, now faced his fate in absolute solitude. No family, no shared words, just a bland food tray and death awaiting. Did he think of the 19-year-old girl buried alive? Or was he simply trying to swallow each bite to forget the lethal drugs to come? In early 2014, Clayton Lockett had been on death row for 14 years. He knew his execution date was approaching, but no one expected his execution to turn into a tragedy. Oklahoma was facing a lethal drug crisis. In 2011, Hospira, the manufacturer of sodium thiopenol, the standard anesthetic, ceased production due to its opposition to capital punishment. U.S. states then faced a severe shortage of execution drugs. Some states bartered supplies, while others were accused of illegally purchasing drugs from India. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration seized sodium thiopenol from several states, escalating the situation. The European Union also banned the export of drugs used for executions. Oklahoma was forced to experiment with a new drug mixture, midazolam to induce unconsciousness, vicuronium bromide to paralyze, and potassium chloride to stop the heart. This mixture had never been used in the U.S. before. Florida had used these three drugs in a 2013 execution, but with a midazolam dose 5 times higher. Oklahoma's secrecy laws concealed the source of the drugs, how they were acquired, and the reason for choosing this mixture. Reports indicated that the drugs were bought with petty cash, making the transaction hard to trace. Governor Mary Fallin was determined to proceed with the execution despite a stay from the Oklahoma Supreme Court. Her Republican allies threatened impeachment proceedings against the justices who tried to delay the execution. Lockett's lawyers requested that the source of the drugs be disclosed, but this was refused. Lockett's stepmother, LaDonna Hollins, expressed concern. What mixture of drugs are you going to use now? Is this instant? Is this going to cause horrible pain? He says he's not scared of dying so much as the drugs administered. On the morning of April 29, Lockett refused to cooperate. He cut himself in his cell, forcing guards to use a taser to subdue him. He refused 2 meals. In the medical room, staff found a cut on his right arm, but it didn't require sutures. Lockett was then moved to a special cell 4 meters from the execution chamber, cold, silent, with only a steel bed and a sink. At 6:00 p.m., the prison went into lockdown. Lockett, dressed in clean clothes, was led by 2 guards to the execution chamber. He was not handcuffed, but his eyes were vacant. Behind the glass, Stephanie Neiman's family, lawyer Dean Sanderford, and reporters sat in silence. Fluorescent lights illuminated the cold room. Lockett was strapped securely to his stainless steel gurney, his arms outstretched as needles were prepared for insertion into his veins. At 6:23 p.m., the execution began. A paramedic tried to insert an IV needle into Lockett's left arm, but failed. She then tried a vein in his bicep, also unsuccessfully. Dr. Johnny Zelmer was called in. He tried 3 times to insert the IV into Lockett's jugular vein in his neck, then the subclavian vein near his collarbone. All failed. The paramedic tried 2 veins in his left foot, to no avail. Finally, Zelmer inserted the needle into the femoral vein in the groin, covering the area with a cloth to shield it from witnesses' view. At 6:33 p.m., after midazolam was administered, Zelmer declared Lockett unconscious. But at 6:36 p.m., everything collapsed. Lockett began to convulse, violently groaning, saying, "Oh man, I'm not, and something's wrong." He tried to lift his head, exhaling loudly as if trying to escape the gurney. Lawyer Sanderford was horrified. It looked like torture. Staff discovered that the femoral IV connection had failed due to a collapsed vein, and the drugs had either absorbed into tissue or leaked out. The covering cloth had prevented them from noticing earlier. At 6:56 p.m., Director Patton ordered a halt to the execution. Dr. Zelmer confirmed that Lockett had not received a sufficient dose to cause death, and there were no remaining drugs to attempt another injection. Guards discussed taking Lockett to a hospital, but no action was taken. At 7:06 p.m., Lockett died of a heart attack after 43 agonizing minutes. No life-saving measures were provided. The execution chamber fell silent. Neiman's family wept, not because Lockett had died, but because of the vivid memory of the 19-year-old girl buried alive. Reporters meticulously documented every detail, preparing for the media storm that was about to erupt. Clayton Lockett's death did not close a painful chapter. It opened a fierce debate about capital punishment in the United States. President Barack Obama called the incident deeply disturbing, ordering Attorney General Eric Holder to review execution policies. He highlighted the uneven application of the death penalty, from racial bias to cases where wrongful convictions were later overturned. The United Nations suggested that the execution may have constituted cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment under international law and cruel and unusual punishment under the U.S. Constitution. The British government urged the U.S. to cease capital punishment, emphasizing that its use undermines human dignity. In Oklahoma, Governor Mary Fallin ordered a review of the execution protocol, but lawyer Dean Sanderford doubted its independence. How can one trust an investigation by the state itself? The execution of Charles Warner, scheduled for 2 hours after Lockett's, was postponed for 14 days. Warner was eventually executed in January 2015, but the controversy did not subside. Human rights organizations strongly condemned the event. Ryan Kiesel of the ACLU of Oklahoma called the incident state-sponsored torture. Antonio Giannata of Human Rights Watch stressed convicted individuals should not be test subjects for a state's grisly experiments. The rate of botched lethal injections in the United States is 7.1%, higher than any other method, from the electric chair to the gas chamber. Lockett's story also raises questions about him as an individual. He was undeniably a brutal criminal. Stephanie Neiman, 19, was raped, shot, and buried alive by him just for threatening to go to the police. Her family would never forgive him. But did Lockett's childhood, abandoned, abused, raped in prison, partly explain the monster he became? Or was it merely an excuse for the blood he shed? Pharmacologist Craig Stevens from Oklahoma State University criticized, midazolam has no analgesic properties. It's a completely different drug class than sodium thiopental. Dying from the other two drugs without an anesthetic is horrific. This drug combination is even forbidden for animal euthanasia in some states. The Lockett case forced Oklahoma and other states to reevaluate their execution protocols. Some states temporarily halted executions while others switched to different methods, such as firing squads. But the larger question still hangs. Can capital punishment be humane, and who is responsible when it fails? Mary Fallin, the drug manufacturers, or the entire justice system? The story of Clayton Lockett is not just about a criminal or a botched execution. It is a mirror reflecting the flaws in justice, the wounds of society, and the cost of retribution. Lockett was a killer, but did his death lessen the pain of Stephanie Neiman's family? Or did it merely create another scar? What are your thoughts on this case? Should capital punishment continue, or is it time to end it? Please leave a comment, share your thoughts, and spread this story to raise awareness.